Cover her up or get her out, Clarissa Benwell barked across the pool deck as Junie clutched her towel like a shield. 24 neighbors looked up from their folding chairs. The lifeguard, a high school junior who'd just started that week, froze. Clarissa didn't care. She stepped closer, one hand on her hip, her other waving a printed copy of HOA Pool Rule 3.1.2, like it was scripture. This isn't a public beach. This is a private family community. That outfit is in violation. Clarissa Benwell, president of our HOA board, had humiliated my 15-year-old niece in front of half the neighborhood, and she was just getting started. I stepped through the gate just in time to hear the last word leave her mouth. Behind me, my nephew Arlen followed, still in his casual clothes from the flight, sunglasses pushed up on his head, carrying the weekend bag he'd brought for what was supposed to be a quiet family visit. Junie hadn't set foot in a public pool for 3 years, not since the accident that left her scarred, inside and out. We'd made it this far. Therapy, healing, rebuilding. A warm afternoon at the community pool was supposed to be a breakthrough, and Clarissa had turned it into a courtroom. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "That rule you're quoting," I said, walking toward them, "it doesn't legally exist." Clarissa turned to face me, her lip curled slightly. "Excuse me?" I pointed to her paper. "No record of vote, no filing with the county, no quorum at the March meeting. That rule is void." Her face didn't change, but her eyes blinked a little too long. Then she noticed Arlen standing quietly behind me, arms folded, watching her with the kind of steady gaze that made people nervous without knowing why. "And you are?" she asked, voice slightly sharper. "Family," Arlen said simply, his tone calm but unmistakably authoritative. If you've ever watched someone in power realize they picked the wrong fight, this is what it looks like. They get quieter, not louder. That's when I knew I had her. Not fully, not yet. But the ground under her heels had cracked, and she knew it. That's exactly why you should hit subscribe right now, because this isn't just a story about a pool. It's what happens when someone like Clarissa thinks they're untouchable, and someone like me walks in with backup she never saw coming. I'm Reuben Wakefield. I moved to Lake Maribel Preserve 6 months ago. Municipal Code Compliance Officer for the city of Nashville, 16 years. I don't do courtroom speeches. I don't chase headlines. But I know the difference between policy and power play. I know what makes a bylaw legal, and I know exactly how many steps someone has to skip to make an entire HOA illegal. Clarissa didn't know who she was picking a fight with, and that was her first mistake. Her second was making it personal. Junie was wearing a modest 2-piece suit, clear straps, high waist, nothing you wouldn't see on a school swim team. But that didn't matter to Clarissa. What mattered to her was that Junie smiled for the first time in weeks as she stepped into that pool, that she laughed with the neighbor girls, that she dared to feel normal. And for someone like Clarissa, control is everything. What she didn't know was that Junie's therapist had recommended the pool, that her healing depended on routine public exposure, not shame, that my sister, God rest her, made me swear before she passed that I'd protect Junie's confidence like a second spine. And now that promise was standing on the other end of a whistleblowing HOA president, with my nephew watching every word. Clarissa stared me down like I'd broken some sacred rule just by existing here. She gestured toward the clubhouse. "We'll be issuing a formal warning. Your niece's behavior will be documented." My niece's behavior. Arlen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing, just watched. I looked down at Junie. Her knuckles were white against the towel. She wasn't crying, but she wasn't blinking either. That was worse. "You'll do what you have to," I said, "and I'll do what's legal." And with that, I led Junie out of the pool gates, past the lifeguard who avoided my eyes, past the cluster of neighbors who said nothing, and back to the pavilion, the one place in this neighborhood where no one had ever tried to police her joy. Arlen followed silently, his presence a quiet reminder that Clarissa had just performed her little power play in front of the wrong audience. As we sat down under the shade, I didn't say anything. I let her breathe. But inside, something snapped. Clarissa wasn't just enforcing a rule, she was rewriting them, without authority, without oversight, and without the faintest understanding of who she was dealing with. She thought she'd made an example out of Junie. What she actually did was start a legal reckoning, And now she had a witness she couldn't intimidate. Junie didn't say a word on the walk home, not through the quiet gravel trail behind the lake, not when we passed the mailboxes Clarissa had personally repainted last month to restore uniformity, not even when we reached the porch of our house, third one down from the corner, the one with the wind chime she liked listening to on bad days. She just went inside, left her towel on the floor, and closed her bedroom door. I stood there for a while, watching the sun bleed into the treetops. That pavilion used to feel like safety. Now, even that felt compromised. The next morning, a letter was already taped to my door. Notice of behavioral citation, violation of community standards, Article 7. Signed in blue ink by Clarissa Benwell, HOA president. No envelope, no timestamp, no board member initials. Just a printed threat left like some holy decree. I took a photo and poured my coffee. 15 minutes later, I walked into the Magnolia Room, a multi-purpose lounge tucked behind the HOA clubhouse. Tuesday mornings meant coffee and coordination for the board. Residents weren't technically barred, but you weren't really welcome unless invited. That didn't stop me. Clarissa sat at the head of the table like a queen without a crown, flanked by two board members I didn't recognize, and, on her left, Eloise Carter, HOA treasurer. A woman whose face had aged into a permanent mask of reluctant agreement. "Good morning, Reuben," Clarissa said without looking up from her laptop. "Did you receive the citation?" "I did," I replied, "and I noticed something strange. Article 7 was repealed last year. The revised codebook you distributed in March doesn't include it." Clarissa paused, fingers still on her keyboard. Eloise looked up, just for a second. "Then consider it enforced under Addendum 3.1.2, Clarissa said coolly. I nodded. The same addendum that never received a vote, never appeared in public meeting minutes, and was never filed with the county clerk. Silence. One of the board members shifted in his chair. Clarissa closed her laptop. "We're not discussing this here." "That's fine," I said. "Just wanted to make sure I wasn't the only one keeping records." The tension cracked like glass. Eloise stared down at her notebook, but her fingers trembled slightly. I left without another word, but not before I heard Clarissa mutter behind me, "Men like that move in, and everything gets messy." That wasn't just a jab. It was a signal, a warning to anyone watching. Clarissa didn't see policy, she saw control, and anyone who challenged it became a threat to neutralize. By that afternoon, I started noticing changes around the neighborhood. The retired couple across the street, Margie and Henry, had their garden flag removed. Non-conforming design, the violation note read. They'd flown the same floral pattern for years. 2 houses down, a woman named Teresa was fined for leaving her trash bin out an hour past pickup. First time in 8 months. Clarissa was circling wagons. She couldn't come after me directly without getting sued, so she was soft pressuring everyone around me. Isolate, undermine, divide. But here's the part she never understood. People notice patterns, especially when the leash starts tightening on their own property. Wednesday night, Margie showed up at my door, holding her violation notice and a copy of the HOA handbook. "Can you take a look?" she asked. By Thursday morning, Teresa had emailed me a photo of her warning slip with the subject line. This new rule wasn't in last year's version, was it? I didn't answer directly. I didn't have to. By Friday afternoon, I'd gotten 5 more questions from neighbors, each one asking in a slightly more careful tone if something felt off lately. That's when I knew the tide had started to shift. I didn't push. I let Clarissa keep moving pieces around the board while I watched. What she thought was control was actually evidence, and she was piling it up for me with every letter, every policy slip, every single act of power disguised as procedure. But I still needed something more, a lever, a witness, someone inside that room who could confirm what I suspected, that Clarissa had been pushing illegal rule changes quietly for months, and I knew exactly who had been there for all of it. Eloise Carter hadn't said a word that morning, but the tremor in her hand said more than silence ever could. I couldn't stop thinking about Eloise Carter's trembling hand. The way her knuckles whitened around that pen in the Magnolia Room told me more than any minutes or emails ever could. She wasn't just nervous. She was caught between loyalty and conscience, between her friend Clarissa and the laws Clarissa was trampling. I'd seen that look in city hearings, people who know the truth but haven't found a way to say it yet. Saturday morning, the lakefront pavilion was nearly empty except for the faint hiss of sprinklers along the shoreline. Junie was sitting cross-legged on the bench, earbuds in, sketching in her notebook. It was the first time since the pool incident that she'd agreed to leave the house. I stayed back a few feet, giving her space. The pavilion had become our quiet zone, a place to breathe where Clarissa's shadow didn't quite reach. That's when Eloise appeared. She didn't see me at first. She'd walked the long gravel path from the clubhouse, still holding her oversized leather planner to her chest like a shield. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, chin tucked, as if she were bracing for a gust of wind. When she spotted Junie, she froze mid-step, then glanced around like she'd wandered into forbidden territory. I stepped forward. "Morning, Eloise." She startled. Her grip on the planner tightened until her fingers trembled. "Oh, Reuben. I didn't expect anyone here." I nodded toward the bench. "Junie likes to draw out here. It's calmer." Eloise's eyes flicked to Junie and then back to me. For a moment, something softened in her face. But just as quickly, she blinked it away and straightened her back. The planner shifted to her other arm. A tell. People do that when they're trying to hold something back. "You've been busy," I said gently. She gave a faint laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Clarissa has a lot of initiatives. Some of them not exactly legal." The words landed between us like a dropped stone. Eloise's left thumb rubbed a nervous circle into the leather cover of her planner. She looked down at the water, her lips pressing tight. Not denial, not surprise, just silence. Junie flipped a page in her sketchbook, oblivious to the current running between us. I lowered my voice. "I'm not here to make trouble, but you know what she's doing isn't right. It's not even about the swimsuit. It's about power without process. That's dangerous, for everyone." Eloise's shoulders rose and fell in a shallow breath. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her eyes darted to the clubhouse, then back to me. She didn't speak, but her body told the story. The way she squeezed the planner, the way her toes curled against her sandals like she was trying to ground herself, the way her jaw tightened each time Clarissa's name came up. I decided not to push. If you ever need someone who understands the bylaws, the real ones, you know where to find me. For a heartbeat, she looked at me fully. Her eyes glistened in the morning light. Then she nodded once, a movement so small it might have been mistaken for a shrug. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the clubhouse, her gait stiff, planner still clutched like evidence she wasn't ready to hand over. Junie looked up from her notebook. "Was that the lady from the pool?" "Sort of," I said. "She's more complicated than she looks." As Eloise's figure grew smaller down the path, I exhaled. This was how it started, with a tremor, a glance, a single crack in the wall. I'd seen enough whistleblowers to recognize the pattern. Once someone knows they're complicit, they either double down or reach out. And Eloise Carter was teetering on the edge of reaching out. Back at the house that afternoon, I began assembling what I had. Not documents hidden in garages or basements, real public evidence. Clarissa's notices, copies of previous bylaws, timestamps of meetings, and neighbors' fresh violation slips. Every piece I logged was another stone in the foundation of a case that didn't just protect Junie, it protected everyone. And if Eloise ever crossed that line from silence to testimony, it would all click into place. I glanced at the lake through the window. Eloise's reflection was still there in my mind. Tight shoulders, trembling hands, planner pressed like a secret between her ribs. She was my lever. She just didn't know it yet. By Monday, Clarissa moved from passive retaliation to open escalation. I came home from the grocery store to find a citation tacked, not taped, tacked to my front door. It accused me of harboring non-conforming household accessories. The alleged accessory? A portable basketball hoop I'd rolled behind the garage weeks ago. I don't even play. It came with the house. An hour later, Teresa called. Her dog leash, 3 feet too long, according to Clarissa, had triggered a safety violation. That same afternoon, Margie emailed me a scanned copy of a fine for prolonged mailbox lid exposure. Apparently, her husband, Henry, had forgotten to close it after retrieving the mail. Clarissa wasn't just tightening the leash, she was wrapping it around our throats. I needed to keep eyes on her without getting pulled into her chaos. So I shifted my focus to the crossing, a small retail strip just outside the HOA gates. It's where Clarissa held her unofficial president hours every Wednesday morning at a cafe called the Poorhouse. The board didn't advertise it, but half the policy shifts in this neighborhood started over her cappuccino. I made sure to sit a few tables away. Laptop open, plain clothes, nothing that looked confrontational. She arrived right on time, wearing her usual coral blazer and silver pin with the HOA logo she had custom-made last year. She smiled tightly at the barista, took her corner booth, and began unpacking a slim accordion folder, no thicker than an inch. To anyone else, she looked like a volunteer organizer, harmless, helpful. 10 minutes later, 2 residents joined her. One of them I recognized, Ben Talley, a retired engineer who lived 4 doors down from me. I remembered him because he once put up solar panels on his roof, and Clarissa made him take them down. Now he was leaning in, nodding, sipping from a paper cup while she slid papers across the table like they were confidential blueprints. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, but what I could see told me more than enough. Ben signed something. Clarissa beamed. She handed him a trifold brochure. He left 15 minutes later, looking satisfied, like he'd just been let in on a secret. I waited until she was alone again, then gathered my things and made a loop around the outside patio, passing just close enough to glimpse the open folder before she closed it. It wasn't a brochure. It was a draft HOA Addendum 4.2.4, typed in 12-point font with handwritten margin notes. I saw 3 key phrases in bold: enforcement override, board discretionary clauses, and non-appealable citations. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was writing herself out of them. I kept walking. That night, I called in a favor to a friend in the county registrar's office. Not a formal request, just a nudge. I asked if anything titled Lake Marybelle HOA Addendum 4.2.4 had been submitted or even scheduled for recording. After a pause, she confirmed, "Nothing by that name exists in our system." That was the first real crack I could prove, but I needed more, because Clarissa was smart. Paranoid smart. She knew how to weaponize process without breaking it, knew how to hide manipulation under official-sounding language and fine print. What I saw at the Poorhouse was more than mismanagement. It was proof that Clarissa had created a shadow process, one that operated outside the community's knowledge, bypassed public record, and manipulated neighbor support through half-truths and carefully curated information. It was time to shift my approach. No more watching from the sidelines. I needed to build a timeline. I needed a paper trail, not of what she'd written, but what she'd omitted. And for that, I needed the one thing she couldn't fabricate: the dates. Because if I could show that she'd enforced addendums that never passed, threatened homeowners with fake citations, and collected signatures under non-ratified amendments, I could make it all collapse. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who had been in those board meetings, someone who saw the drafts before they became threats. And I knew exactly where to find her. The next morning, I walked to the community garden, Clarissa's least patrolled domain. It was where Eloise planted snapdragons, quiet, out of sight. The place people go when they're trying to make sense of things without anyone watching. Eloise was already there when I reached the garden, kneeling in the shade beside a line of withered sunflowers. She wore the same wide-brimmed hat I'd seen her wear at HOA cleanup days, though now it sat crooked on her head. The gloves she wore were spotless, not a speck of soil on them. She wasn't gardening, she was hiding. I stayed back, giving her a few quiet seconds before stepping off the gravel path. "You missed a good view," I said. "Clarissa was at the Poorhouse yesterday, handing out unratified rules like coupons." Eloise didn't look up. She pinched a dead leaf and placed it in a bucket beside her. 4.2.4, I added. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Her hand paused midair, then dropped the leaf. The bucket made a soft plastic thud. "I'm not the board attorney," she said quietly. "No, but you're the treasurer. You know when things get filed and when they don't." She turned toward the snapdragons and brushed at nothing with her glove. Her movements were gentle, hesitant. I could see the conflict folding in on her shoulders. "I've seen drafts," she admitted finally. "Clarissa says they're just templates, nothing final." "But she's enforcing them," I said, "handing out violations, threatening residents. That's not a template, Eloise. That's a weapon." her fingers clenched into a fist inside the glove. "She thinks it'll protect the neighborhood," she whispered. "Keep out the wrong kind of people." "And Junie?" I asked. "Is she the wrong kind? Because Clarissa humiliated her in front of half the block. My niece doesn't even leave the house anymore." Eloise looked down, her lips pressed together, trembling. "I didn't vote for it," she said. "You didn't stop it either." That landed hard. She winced like I'd slapped her with the truth. I let the silence stretch. "I've worked with policy my whole career," I continued. "I know how it happens. One unchecked clause at a time, one signature too early, one file that never makes it to the clerk's office. You think it's just paperwork until it hurts someone." Eloise's voice cracked. She told me it was temporary, that we'd formalize it later. Later never comes with Clarissa, and if this keeps going, the board becomes liable. Not just her, everyone who stayed silent. Her hands shook now, visibly. She stood up slowly, gripping the edge of the bucket for balance. Her gaze didn't meet mine. "There are no timestamps," she murmured. "No approval log, just her. Handwriting in the margins. Some of the dates were backfilled. I thought it was just poor organization." "It's fraud," I said, "and she's counting on no one knowing better." Eloise finally met my eyes. "I can't give you board documents." "I don't need board documents," I said. "I need what's already in public view, citations that reference rules that don't exist, meeting minutes that were never posted. I just needed to confirm that what she's using to punish people was never approved." She took off her gloves slowly, like the weight of everything she'd ignored had finally sunk in. "I still have last month's digital draft," she said. "It's saved on my personal laptop. I forwarded it to review and never got a response. Clarissa used it anyway." That was it. I didn't need a leak. I needed a time-stamped email. One that proved the version Clarissa enforced had never been finalized, never voted on, and never entered into HOA records. "I'm not asking you to turn on her," I said. "I'm asking you to protect your neighbors." She didn't reply. Just nodded, once. Soft, but solid. That night, an email hit my inbox, forwarded, titled Draft Only, for review, not finalized. Attached was a PDF, Addendum 4.2.4, Enforcement Discretions Expansion. No signatures, no board approval, no filing number. I clicked on the timestamp. Sent, 11:16 a.m. 2 days before Clarissa issued the first citation using it. That was all I needed. Victory strategy progress, official confirmation. Clarissa had been enforcing unratified rules. The next morning, I printed everything. The forwarded email, the attached draft, the timestamp, the list of citations issued under that addendum. I didn't need internal board minutes or confidential files, just proof that Clarissa had taken a draft rule and used it to punish real people before it was legal. The HOA's own process ignored. The county's filing requirements bypassed. And with Eloise's quiet confirmation backing it, I finally had a case. I took it to the one place Clarissa never expected to be challenged, the Architectural Review Committee office. Tucked behind the pool and tennis courts, it was rarely used except for paint color approvals and fencing requests. But it was technically the only public access space inside HOA operations where any homeowner could submit a formal policy challenge for board review. The walls were covered in beige bulletin boards, most of them empty. A faded map of Lake Maribel hung by the door. A dry erase calendar hadn't been updated in 4 months. I found the Dropbox near the corner window. It was dented, dusty, and ignored. I slid in my packet, labeled, time-stamped, and fully within the HOA's own dispute protocol. Then, I took photos of everything. Not because I expected them to lose it, because I knew Clarissa would try to pretend it never happened. As I stepped outside, I caught sight of Junie walking, along the far sidewalk with a sketchbook under one arm. Her hair was tied up, and she was laughing, actually laughing, with another girl from the neighborhood. That sound hit me harder than any threat Clarissa could dish out. She was still fighting to belong here, so I had to fight harder. That afternoon, the retaliation ramped up. Margie and Henry found a second notice on their door. Failure to comply with mailbox standards may result in daily fines. Teresa's bin was confiscated outright, taken by a board-appointed volunteer with no warning. Then I got a letter of my own. Notice of non-compliance, structural review failure. Claim, My front-facing window screen violated visibility regulations. The kicker? That screen had been installed by the previous owners and had passed inspection at purchase. Clarissa was trying to bury me in noise. I wasn't surprised, but I was surprised when Ben Talley, Mr. Solar Panels, showed up at my door just before sunset. He looked tired, holding a folder in one hand and a stiff smile on his face. Clarissa told me to sign a form about a new solar exemption, he said it was part of a board adjustment, but I never saw the original. And now she's citing me again. Can I show you something? He handed me a copy of the form. The formatting was identical to Addendum 4.2.4. Same font, same margins, same signature block, unsigned. She's using the same unratified templates on everyone, I said. Ben nodded. I thought it was just me, but now I'm not so sure. That made 7 separate homeowners who'd received citations based on invisible rules. Clarissa had overplayed her hand. She assumed we'd all stay isolated, filing our appeals one at a time, too exhausted to challenge her. But we were starting to find each other. And when people stop feeling alone, they stop feeling powerless. By evening, I had 3 new emails from neighbors, each with scanned notices, none of which referenced legally approved policies. That's when I did it. I drafted a formal petition to call an emergency community meeting. The HOA bylaws allowed it if 10% of residents requested it in writing. I already had 8. I only needed 3 more. I sent out a message to the others, kept it factual, calm, precise, just like I'd write it in a city audit. Several citations have been issued referencing policy amendments that were never ratified or filed. This is a violation of HOA procedure. I am requesting an emergency meeting to address the matter publicly. I attached every timestamp, every visual, every neighbor's confirmation. That night, I dropped the petition at Eloise's door. I didn't ring the bell. The trap was set. I didn't hear from Eloise the next day or the day after. The petition sat in limbo, 11 signatures strong, one short of the minimum required to force a public HOA meeting. I wasn't worried, not yet, but I was watching the clock. Clarissa moved fast. When she smelled resistance, and I knew she wouldn't sit idle much longer. Then, on Friday morning, I got a text. Meet me behind the chapel, 4 p.m., come alone. E. The chapel sat just outside the neighborhood boundary line, technically not under HOA jurisdiction. Clarissa avoided it like the plague. No cameras, no committees, just a modest brick building with a gravel trail winding behind it into a tree-covered rest area. It was the one place Eloise could speak freely. I arrived early. Eloise showed up with her planner clutched in both arms like she always did. But this time, there was no pretense of civility. Her hat was gone, her hair undone. Her eyes were red around the edges like she hadn't slept. You're putting me in a difficult spot, she said before I could speak. I held my ground. You asked me to meet. She exhaled. Clarissa's rewriting the system, Reuben. It's not just unfiled addendums. She's altering the board logs, backdating approvals, removing dissenting votes, even editing meeting summaries before they're posted. My jaw tightened. You have proof? She hesitated. Then she opened her planner. Between the pages was a USB drive taped to a yellow index card. I started backing up the original drafts last month, she said. Before Clarissa could change them, the minutes she submitted to the HOA site last week, they're different from the drafts we reviewed, different enough to be intentional. She handed me the USB. Her hand shook again, but not like before. This wasn't fear. This was release. I'm not the hero here, she said. I sat quiet too long. I thought I was protecting stability, but I was protecting a lie. This isn't about being the hero, I said. It's about stopping a fraud before it becomes permanent. Eloise glanced toward the trees. I've also been keeping the vote records, the real ones. Clarissa only had one other board member vote on Addendum 4.2.4, and it was never a full quorum. She listed a third vote anyway, used a board member who was out of town at the time. Forgery, Eloise nodded. And I think she's done it before. Will you say that publicly? She hesitated. Not yet, but if I'm asked directly, I won't lie. That was enough. I pocketed the USB, careful not to break the tape still stuck to it. Thank you, I said quietly. She gave a hollow laugh. Don't thank me yet. When Clarissa finds out, she'll come after me too. She won't have time. Because what Eloise had just given me wasn't just useful, it was explosive. Not only had Clarissa enforced unratified rules, but she'd manipulated internal records to make it look legitimate. That crossed a line even most HOA boards wouldn't touch. And once that evidence became public, her presidency would collapse overnight. As I walked back home, the weight of the drive in my pocket felt like a fuse ready to be lit. That night, I reviewed every file. The USB contained original meeting notes with Eloise's tracked edits, an unmodified copy of Addendum 4.2.4 with Draft Do Not Circulate in bold, a vote tally spreadsheet showing only 2 active votes at the time of approval, an email from Clarissa sent after the fact, instructing board members to streamline the minutes before posting them publicly. That last line said it all. Streamline the minutes. It was bureaucratic code for rewrite history. I uploaded the files to a cloud drive and prepared a secure folder with read-only access. I included the petition, timestamps, public notices, and a short written statement summarizing what the evidence showed. I scheduled the email for Sunday evening, timed to arrive in the inbox of every HOA homeowner 24 hours before the next board session, and I saved a copy for someone else too. My nephew Arlen, Junie's brother, a sitting state judge who'd agreed to visit the day of the public meeting, quietly, as a concerned relative. The endgame was coming. Clarissa just didn't know how close we were. Sunday morning arrived with an eerie stillness, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. You could feel the shift. Front porches stayed quiet, sprinklers came on late, and not a single stroller passed my window before noon. Word had started to spread. The petition, the evidence, the addendum, it was leaking through the walls Clarissa had built for years. I spent the day at the community library on the edge of town, a place no HOA official could touch. It was small, underfunded, and perfect. The staff knew me as the guy who helped them reorganize their zoning compliance folder last fall. They gave me the study room with the frosted glass door and didn't ask questions. I opened my laptop and began building the counteroffensive. First, I organized the files Eloise had given me into 4 folders: unratified rules, falsified vote records, backdated meeting minutes, neighbor citations. Each folder had a cover sheet, plain language, no legal jargon. I wasn't writing for lawyers. I was writing for scared neighbors who didn't yet realize they had rights. Clarity was the only weapon that mattered now. I compiled a single master PDF, 48 pages, indexed and time-stamped. At the end of the document, I added one final piece, a full side-by-side comparison of the meeting minutes Eloise reviewed versus the ones Clarissa had published. Every removed sentence was highlighted. Every backfilled date circled. I titled the file Board Bylaws Comparison, submitted for public review. Then I created a shared folder with open view access and copied the link to a clean email. The subject line read, Lake Mary Bell HOA Emergency Evidence. Please review before tomorrow's meeting. It was scheduled for 6 p.m. sharp, just after dinner, just before panic, when neighbors would be most likely to check their inboxes and talk to each other. Then, did something Clarissa never would. I knocked on doors. Margie and Henry were first. I explained what was coming. I showed them the section where their mailbox citation had been issued under an unapproved clause. Henry signed a declaration stating he never received proper notice of rule change. Margie added her own signature with a short, handwritten line. I was never informed of this rule. From there, I went to Teresa's, then to Ben Talley. I didn't need a lawsuit. I just needed proof of pattern, real people affected, real harm done. By the time I left the library parking lot that evening, I had 6 signed resident statements, 1 expert witness email from Eloise, and a fully documented digital trail. It wasn't just a policy issue anymore. It was a systemic failure under Clarissa's watch. But the final piece of preparation happened back at my house. Junie sat at the kitchen table, sketching again. Her drawings were looser now, freer. She hadn't asked about the meeting, but she didn't need to. She knew what I was doing. I don't want to go back to that pool, she said suddenly without looking up. You don't have to, I replied. But no one should be able to take it from you either. She nodded once and kept drawing. At 8 p.m., the email launched. 52 recipients, all residents, all current on their dues, all eligible to vote and speak at board meetings. Attached were the documents, the statements, the addendum evidence, and one sentence of context. This is what's been happening under Addendum 4.2.4, without board approval, without legal authority, and without your consent. I signed it with my name, my job title, and my contact information. Then I sent a separate one to Clarissa. No attachments, no explanation. Just the subject line. We're not afraid of your paperwork anymore. The board meeting was set for 6 p.m. Monday in the Lake Maribel Community Hall. I had a suit pressed. I had printed copies of every statement. And I had a quiet guest arriving that afternoon on a red-eye from Nashville, Arlen Wakefield, state circuit judge, and Junie's older brother. The next 24 hours would decide whether this neighborhood belonged to its residents or to a woman who thought she could write the rules faster than anyone could read them. I didn't sleep much that night. Too many moving parts, too many variables. I replayed every step, every document, every phrase Clarissa could twist to deflect. She'd built her authority through intimidation and precision, death by fine print. I had to be sharper. By dawn, I was parked outside the quarry, our gated neighborhood's maintenance building and tool shed, now repurposed as a makeshift board archive. Clarissa had always used it as her quiet fallback, where she met privately with selective residents and stored hard copies of citations in a locked cabinet. The place was empty, just like I expected. I wasn't here to sneak in. I was here to prepare. I walked the perimeter, photographing the official signage, one in particular that spelled out the HOA's own filing policy. All new rules and amendments must be posted within 48 hours of board vote, right there in black and white. I zoomed in, snapped it from 3 angles, and sent it to my cloud drive. Then I took a picture of the notice board inside, bare, nothing new posted in months, strike one. From there, I headed to the Founders Park gazebo, where the meeting would be held that night. It was already being prepped, folding chairs stacked in neat rows, a single long table at the front, and the HOA seal draped across the railing like a flag of authority. I walked the space, counted seats, marked my angles. Clarissa wouldn't expect a visual presentation. She expected passive murmurs, paper complaints, maybe a few frustrated residents raising concerns. But I had something else planned. I called Ben Talley, who'd offered his portable projector after we spoke. "Still good to bring it?" I asked. "Absolutely," he said. "I've already got it loaded. We'll plug it in when she least expects it." Ben wasn't just angry. He was energized. Clarissa's overreach had burned one too many people, and now they were starting to realize they didn't have to take it quietly. Back home, I went over the script, not a legal argument, an exposure sequence. Start with the citations, mailbox fines, leash lengths, window screens, then reveal the addendum that justified them, 4.2.4. Next, the timestamp of the unratified draft from Eloise's email. Then, the altered vote record, showing the third board vote was forged while the real board member was out of town. Finally, the side-by-side meeting minutes showing Clarissa's edits, proof of manipulation. I laid it all out in a clean slide deck. No theatrics, just the truth. Each slide carried a photo, a date, and a highlighted line. The final one was a single sentence. No HOA president is above the rules she enforces. The file was loaded on 2 USBs and a cloud backup. At 4:45 p.m., Arlen arrived. He stepped out of a black rideshare in a gray suit, casual overcoat, and sunglasses. Low-key, but unmistakable. Even in silence, he carried presence. Not from arrogance, but from the kind of quiet weight a man earns after years of watching people lie in courtrooms. "Thanks for coming," I said, handing him the file. "I'm not here as a judge," he replied. "I'm just here as Junie's brother. That's all we need." He nodded. "I'll sit in the front. Say nothing unless asked." Perfect. We walked the path toward the community hall just as residents began arriving. Small clusters, folded arms, side glances. Some held printed copies of the email I sent. Others looked confused, unsure why this meeting felt different. Then Clarissa arrived. Same coral blazer, same sharp smile. But I saw it, the flicker behind her eyes. She'd read the email. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know how far we were willing to go. She spotted Arlen. Her face stiffened. I watched her mouth the words, "Who's that?" She didn't recognize him. Even better. By the time the chairs filled, 51 homeowners had arrived. That was more than half the neighborhood. Ben nodded to me from the tech table. The projector was ready. Clarissa took her place at the head table, flanked by 2 board members, neither of whom made eye contact with her. She adjusted the microphone. "We'll now begin the Lake Maribel Preserve HOA monthly meeting," she said, and I raised my hand. "Before that," I said, "I have a formal challenge to file." Clarissa's eyes narrowed the second I spoke. She didn't interrupt, yet, but her fingers curled against the edge of the microphone, like she was deciding whether to yank it out or let me hang myself. I didn't give her the chance. "This is a formal policy challenge under Article 2, Section 6, I said, holding up the signed petition. "Filed with 11 verified homeowner signatures, we're requesting immediate review of enforcement actions taken under Addendum 4.2.4, an amendment that was never ratified, never posted, and never filed." Murmurs rippled through the room. People leaned forward in their chairs. Clarissa held still, a tight smile frozen on her face. "That's a serious accusation," she said carefully. "One I suggest you withdraw before this meeting becomes disorderly." "Then let's stay orderly," I said, and turned toward Ben. He nodded once and dimmed the lights. The projector flicked on, casting the first slide across the back wall of the community hall. "Citations under review," the title read. Beneath it, 6 names appeared: Margie, Henry, Teresa, Ben, and 2 others who had remained anonymous but gave written permission to be included. Next to each name, their citation and the clause used to justify it, all referenced 4.2.4. I advanced the slide. "Here's the original email containing the draft of Addendum 4.2.4, I continued, laser pointer steady. "Dated June 14th, marked draft, not finalized, and never submitted to vote. Clarissa began enforcing it 2 days later. Eloise sat rigid 2 rows back, arms folded tight, face pale but unmoving. Her presence said everything without her needing to speak. Clarissa stood. "This is a distortion," she said sharply. "Board consensus was obtained verbally." "There is no record of that," I cut in. "No vote log, no approval minutes. And one of the 3 votes listed in your version came from a board member who was out of state at the time." Gasps now. Actual gasps. The next slide showed the falsified meeting minutes. I had circled the differences between Clarissa's published version and the one Eloise had saved. "Here," I said, pointing. "This paragraph was removed. This vote was added after the fact. This date was backfilled." Clarissa turned toward the board members flanking her. Neither met her gaze. "I move to adjourn this meeting until legal counsel can review," she began, voice sharp and rising. But I wasn't done. "There's more," I said, voice level. "According to HOA procedure, posted clearly on the wall of our own maintenance shed, any new rule must be posted publicly within 48 hours of passage. I visited the site yesterday. Nothing was posted. No addendum, no notice." I clicked to the final slide. It was a photo of the maintenance shed notice board, empty. Next to it, a zoomed-in image of the HOA policy signage stating the 48-hour rule. Clarissa's mouth opened, then closed. Arlen stood slowly. "I'm not here in any official capacity," he said, voice calm and measured. "But as a homeowner's relative, and as someone deeply familiar with procedural law, I'd advise this board to take this presentation very seriously. The evidence presented suggests a pattern of procedural fraud and the misuse of authority." The room went still. Clarissa's voice, when it came, was hoarse. "You're a judge?" Arlen didn't answer. He didn't have to. Ben turned the projector off. I stepped forward one last time. "This isn't about technicalities," I said. "This is about trust. Every fine, every warning, every humiliation handed out under fake authority is a stain on this community. We're not here to fight. We're here to fix what's broken." The room erupted, not into chaos, but into clapping, soft at first, then louder. Clarissa stood frozen, hands still on the mic, watching her control dissolve in real time. "I move," someone shouted from the back, "to remove the president from her position until an emergency review can be conducted." "I second that," said another. Clarissa tried to speak, but her voice was buried under the rising tide of neighbors no longer afraid to raise theirs. Clarissa didn't sit down. Not at first. She stood at the front of the room, gripping the microphone like it was the last thing tethering her to authority. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a loyal face, but even her allies, what few she had left, were no longer looking at her. The energy had shifted. Whatever silent power she once commanded had evaporated under the fluorescent lights of the community hall. "This is outrageous!" she snapped, voice trembling. "You're all being manipulated by someone who hasn't even lived here a full year." Laughter broke out from the back. A man in a denim jacket called out, "At least he follows the law." Dozens of neighbors packed the folding chairs, shoulder to shoulder, many holding printed packets I'd shared. Some were recording with phones. Others just sat in stunned silence, jaws clenched, waiting to see if this was finally the night things would change. Clarissa tried again. "You don't understand what he's doing," she said, pointing toward me. "This isn't about rules. It's about dismantling order. You let people like that challenge the process, and everything falls apart." Eloise stood up. "Clarissa," she said, voice calm but clear, "you forged a vote in my name." A ripple moved through the room like a shockwave. Clarissa froze mid-sentence. "You listed me as present for a session I never attended," Eloise continued. "You altered meeting minutes. You made edits after our drafts were finalized. And you enforced rules that weren't ratified because you assumed no one would check." Clarissa turned pale. "Eloise, you're confused." "I have the original emails," Eloise said, "and I've signed a formal statement to that effect." Gasps now, audible, rising. A few people stood, including Teresa and Ben, nodding in support. "You targeted my husband and me over a mailbox," Margie shouted from the front row. "Made us feel like criminals over a decorative flag. And now we find out the rule didn't even exist?" "You charge my family $150 for a leash violation," another man said, "when you wrote the leash policy the night before." "I lost my garden," a woman whispered through tears. "You made me tear it out because it had unapproved dimensions. I cried for days." One by one, the voices grew louder, past the point of order, past any gavel Clarissa could slam. This was no longer a meeting. This was a reckoning. Arlen remained seated, arms folded, watching carefully. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone had become the weight that kept everything from spiraling. Clarissa tried one last time. "I acted in good faith," she said, her voice cracking. "I did what I thought was best for this community." "No," I said, standing. "You did what was best for your control. And you hid behind paperwork you never had the right to write." Ben stepped forward and placed a motion slip on the table. I motioned to suspend Clarissa Benwell from her position as HOA president pending formal review by independent counsel. Teresa raised her hand. "I second." The room surged. Voices echoed from every side. I, yes, in favor. Motion carries." Clarissa stood motionless. No allies, no rebuttal. Only the sound of her breath catching in her throat as her title was stripped away by the very people she believed she could rule unchecked. Eloise stepped forward and gently took the HOA binder from the table. Clarissa didn't resist. She just let go. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no collapse, just the quiet end of a reign built on fear and forged rules. Eloise turned to face the crowd. "We'll schedule the emergency review within the week," she said. "And moving forward, all amendments will be posted publicly, voted on properly, and filed within legal timelines." Applause erupted. Neighbors clapped, some cheering, others crying. Clarissa slipped out the side door unnoticed, her blazer stiff on her shoulders like it no longer fit. Junie arrived just as the meeting broke up. She stood near the entrance, sketchbook under one arm, watching as neighbors approached me to shake my hand, share their stories, or just say thank you. She didn't say anything, but she smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't guarded. After the meeting ended, the crowd didn't scatter right away. They lingered. Some drifted out into the warm Tennessee night to talk in small groups. Others stayed behind to help fold chairs or collect copies of the evidence packets left on the tables. It didn't feel like cleanup. It felt like reclamation. I stepped outside with Junie. The gazebo lights buzzed behind us, casting long shadows across the trimmed lawn. The stars were just starting to poke through the haze. She walked beside me silently, her sketchbook now clutched to her chest instead of her side. More confident, steadier. I didn't think people would actually speak up, she said softly. People don't need permission to be brave, I replied. Just a moment to realize they're not alone. We reached the edge of the lawn where the sidewalk curved back toward the lake. Junie paused. Can we stop at the pavilion? I nodded. The lakefront pavilion, the same spot Clarissa tried to make small, tried to steal with shame, was quiet, peaceful. The breeze off the water rustled the leaves, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally exhale. Junie sat on the bench and flipped open her sketchbook. Inside, her latest page showed a rough pencil drawing of the boardroom, Clarissa at the table, Eloise standing, a crowd behind them, rising. You drew this before the meeting? I asked. She shrugged. Didn't know how it would end, but I wanted to see it go right, just once. I looked out at the lake, then back at her. You gave me the reason to fight. I just followed through. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. By the end of that week, the board formally suspended all enforcement actions tied to Addendum 4.2.4. Every citation issued under it was revoked. Fines were reimbursed. A temporary oversight committee was created, with Ben, Teresa, and Margie among its members, to review all procedural gaps in the HOA's current charter. Eloise stepped in as interim president until a new election could be held. Clarissa never returned. She resigned quietly the following Monday, citing health reasons. No one protested. The mailbox flags came back. Margie replanted her front garden. Teresa walked her dog with the leash she preferred. And the kids? They returned to the pool like nothing had ever happened, except Junie. She waited, watched, measured everything with quiet eyes. Until 2 weeks later. It was a Sunday afternoon, the sun high, the pool filled with laughter. Without saying a word, she put on her suit, the same one Clarissa had tried to shame her for, grabbed a towel, and headed toward the gate. This time, when she stepped through it, no one said a thing. She swam until sunset. I watched from the pavilion, arms crossed, heart full. This fight wasn't about rules. It was about dignity, about what happens when one person tries to right themselves above the law and silence everyone else under it. But communities aren't made of bylaws. They're made of people. And when people remember their voice, paper bullies fall fast. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because somewhere out there, someone like Clarissa is holding a clipboard and daring someone to challenge her. And someone like you might be exactly who steps up next.